It's looking like another week of Andy Dalton at quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, barring anything unforeseen, but why this week could be different for the Red Rifle. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays of Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's Friday episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline. They got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On today's episode, of course, it's Friday, so we'll get into our beignets and parlays. Is the money line the way to go in this Sunday matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Seattle Seahawks? And just how much further has Chris Olave climbed up the chart for Offensive Rookie of the Year? We'll go through the game plan of what it will take for the New Orleans Saints to get a win against the Seattle Seahawks. But first, it's looking like it might be Dalton season part 2 in New Orleans. Michael Thomas, New Orleans Saints wide receiver, as well as quarterback Jameis Winston, not practicing on Wednesday or Thursday. Now, something to keep in mind. In London, Jameis Winston didn't practice Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and the Saints still listed him as doubtful just in case they were going to be able to find a way to get him out on the field by Sunday. Jameis has not been at practice Wednesday or Thursday of this week. We'll see later on today if he's at practice for the Friday session. If so, expect him to be on the injury report as questionable, and the Saints to take this down to a game time decision about who starts at quarterback. Some of that might be strategery. The other part of it might simply be because they want to get Jameis Winston back out on the field. But as Dennis Allen recently said, they want to get him healthy first and foremost. So all of those signs to me kind of point to a second week of Andy Dalton. But things can be different for Andy Dalton this week, particularly in terms of avoiding another slow start for the New Orleans Saints offense. And there's one key player that looks like is going to be healthy this weekend that makes all the difference. And that's running back Alvin Kamara. Yeah, it might be that they won't have wide receiver Michael Thomas, but that didn't seem to be that much of an issue for the New Orleans Saints passing attack last week. This week, they're going up against much younger, much more aggressive secondary that you might be able to take advantage of. You're still going to have Jarvis Landry. You're still going to have Chris Olave. Marquez Callaway steps really well into that X-receiver split-end role, but they can also move him around and utilize him from a bunch of different places. Same thing when it comes to Traquan Smith. So the Saints won't lack for weapons in the passing game, especially with the way that if Andy Dalton is the quarterback going into this weekend, he utilizes tight ends and running backs out of the backfield. But it's that running back out of the backfield that ends up being the biggest difference maker if the Red Rifle is the guy again this week. And I'll be honest, even if he's not, and Jameis Winston is the guy again this weekend, which would be very surprising to me at this point, just based on the injury, recovery, the process, all of that. Alvin Kamara changes everything for you. Alvin Kamara kind of admitted that he felt like he rushed back against the Carolina Panthers, couldn't really get going very well in that game, but now he feels 100%, feels much closer to 100% at least, and feels much better ready to come back here against the Seattle Seahawks. The last 2 times that Alvin Kamara has played against the Seattle Seahawks, he's averaged 27.5 carries, 25 in one, 30 in the other, over 160 yards in both. I believe the total scrimmage yards totals were 161 in 2019, 179 in 2021, just this last year. So for the Saints, regardless of who it is, whether it's Andy Dalton or if it's Jameis Winston under center, and again, I think more likely to be Andy Dalton this weekend, the thing that changes it all is having Alvin Kamara back. And not just having him back on the field, but having him back and healthy, which remains to be seen. We'll have to see him out on the field. But I'll tell you what I've seen from him in practice so far. He looks good. He looks comfortable. Doesn't seem to be hampered at all or anything like that. Rib injury, though, so we'll have to see what it's like once he takes a hit, right? And see how all that comes together. But for the most part, he doesn't seem like he's nursing anything. There's nothing sort of discernible about the way that he's running or protecting himself or what he's keeping himself from doing, anything like that. So it's good news. It's good news to have Alvin Kamara back. And what Alvin Kamara gives you is kind of twofold, right? This New Orleans Saints team needs to be one that's starting to string together drives. Having an efficient and effective run game will be one of the easiest ways to allow them to do that. We saw that last week. The Saints ran, 27 times through the ball, 28 times, so they had additional dropbacks with, Andy Dalton being sacked and things like that. But even still, it was still nearly a 50-50% split between run and pass. That hasn't necessarily been the case for the New Orleans Saints through the first 3 weeks of the season. They weren't even near that total. I'm trying to see here if I can find. So between the last 3 games, the Saints were at 63% share when it came to their run pass, or when it came to their run pass split. So 63% in favor of the pass, but the last game was 52% pass. So that really evened up and closed the gap. You think about that was technically a home game. So you think about the 2 away games that the Saints have played. 61%, 62% in the passing game there. So we've seen the Saints really lean in on the passing game quite a bit, but not be able to lean in on the run game. Remember, the split in the fourth quarter combined in the first 3 games was like 56 passing attempts to 2 rushing attempts. 2 rushing attempts for 7 yards in the fourth quarter combined in the first 3 games. This past week, 9 rushes, 51 yards in the fourth quarter, a much more palatable kind of total there in terms of what you're looking for. So that's a little bit more of what Alvin Kamara gives you. He'll give you a more efficient run game. And because of what he does in the run game, that's going to sort of open things up in terms of how he's able to impact the passing game. Plus, if you have somebody that's going to be able to distribute the ball all over, which means taking what the defense is giving you as opposed to keying in on different receivers and things like that, then that gives you a more opportunity to start to stretch the defense laterally, open up some of the running lanes in the middle. The Saints offensive line has taken some major strides here over the course of the past couple of weeks, particularly in the run game. And so the Saints should be able to capitalize on all of that as well. And it may be an efficient screen game, which is something that the Seattle Seahawks have struggled against so far this season. Speaking of that screen game and what the Seattle Seahawks have struggled against, that's a big part of what my game plan is for the New Orleans Saints to get a win this weekend against the Seattle Seahawks. So let's break it down. What will it take for the New Orleans Saints to get that win on a Sunday and get a little bit closer to 500, 2-3 before they get to a major stretch, a very challenging stretch of their season? We'll break it all down with the game plan coming up here in just a moment. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Simply Safe. Simply Safe is one of the products that I use. Here's my Simply Safe little home hub. And through this guy right here, along with all of the sensors and motion detections and outdoor cameras and everything, I'm able to keep track of what's going on in or around the home, which is really, really nice to be able to kind of have that peace of mind, which is huge. So Simply Safe, I cannot speak highly enough about. Absolutely love their products. And I'm going to be honest, when they sent me the box for the full security system, it was a lot of pieces. Felt really daunting at first, but it was so easy to set up, ridiculously easy to set up. Took me all of maybe 25 minutes to get it all set up. So it was really cool to be able to see that, and then for it to just click, and then all of a sudden it all worked. So this is really, really cool. And I love what they're doing. It allows you to sort of avert potential trespassers. It allows you to be in direct communication with emergency services, take care of yourself and your family, all of that. And they make it super, as the name suggests, safe and simple. So you can customize your perfect system for your home in just a few minutes over at Simply Safe, SIMPLISAFE. So simply with an I as opposed to a Y. simplysafe.com/lockedonnfl. And you can save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. All you have to do is visit simplysafe.com/lockedonnfl to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for being a Locked On Saints, your first listen of the day, every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out NFL Key Predictions every Friday over at Locked On NFL. You're going to get the local experts giving you everything you need to know, the inside scoop on the 5 biggest games around the NFL weekend, including Sunday and Monday Night Football, plus betting advice from the field's leading experts at BetOnline. Once again, that is NFL Key Predictions on Locked On NFL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast, same places that you're catching this. And as always, thank you very much for being here with us for another episode of Locked On Saints. Whether you're new to the show, whether you've been here for a while, I appreciate you very much for all of your support. Speaking of support, New Orleans Saints need a win this weekend if they want to keep up fan support. That's just kind of the vibe that I'm getting. I mean, look, the fact of the matter here is that no matter what, Saints fans are going to be Saints fans, right? Like, you're never going to strip this team of its community. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to cause that kind of a rift. But there are going to be times where, fan bases are going to say, you know what? Let's look ahead to the draft and see how everything's going. And dang it, I'm not ready to do that here on the show. So the New Orleans Saints are going to be looking to get a win here this weekend. And this is one of the ways that they help to keep their season alive. 1-4 is a very different future than 2-3, especially when you have all of these NFC conference opponents early on this season. Now, you're about to get into a whole string of AFC opponents. You have the Cincinnati Bengals on the way, Las Vegas Raiders on the way, Pittsburgh Steelers, the Baltimore Ravens, all that. So that kind of lightens things up in terms of the conference move. But so far, you're 1-3 in the conference. And that's not great. And you're 1-2 in the division at that, also not great, Bob. So when it comes to what you're looking for this weekend, the Saints are simply looking for a win. It's kind of as must win as a 5th game of the season can get. So how do the New Orleans Saints get that win? Well, the first key is, of course, Alvin Kamara. You got to get the ball in Alvin Kamara's hands. You have to let Kamara cook. We've been saying it, and it's about time that the New Orleans Saints do it, especially if they have a second week here with Andy Dalton. What was the one thing that Andy Dalton would have this weekend that he didn't have last weekend? Outside of Michael Thomas, it's Alvin Kamara, that additional weapon out of the backfield. Now, don't get me wrong, Latavius Murray had a really nice day on the ground, but he doesn't give you the things that Alvin Kamara gives you in terms of an all-purpose, all-around back. So getting Alvin Kamara back is a huge boost, a huge benefit for any quarterback, but specifically we'll mention for Andy Dalton because I expect that he'll be the quarterback this weekend unless something unforeseen happens and Jameis Winston is just like, I'm ready to go. You know what I mean? Which is completely possible because it's hard to keep Jameis Winston off the field. The next thing, flip over to the defensive side. You got to get pressure with the front 4, not necessarily blitzing a lot on Geno Smith, although when you get those opportunities on 3rd down and you have those sort of obvious passing downs and you're talking long and late downs, so 3rd and 8 or longer, things like that, absolutely. Send the blitz, have fun, be aggressive, do that whole thing. But when it comes to what you're doing on a down-by-down basis, what would be really helpful for the New Orleans Saints is to be able to get pressure with their front 4. And that's something that the Saints proved that they could do last week against a not as good offensive line in Minnesota, but it's not a super great offensive line here in Seattle either. You've got 2 rookies at left tackle right now. Charles Cross, who was my favorite tackle in this year's class, so credit to him, but he's someone that struggles in terms of true pass rushing sets. And then you have Abraham Lucas, who is one of my other favorites actually in this class, one of my kind of underrated guys over on the right side that's got to go up against Cam Jordan on a down-by-down basis. Cam Jordan had 6 pressures last week against the Vikings. Marcus Davenport had 4 against the Vikings. They had 10 of the 15 pressures that were clocked by Pro Football Focus on this New Orleans Saints defense. So pretty good. You just want to see that replicated here in this game. If you can get pressure with the front 4 and then drop those other, quick math, 7 players into coverage, then all of a sudden you're able to do the things that disrupt timing in this Seattle Seahawks offense, which is what you're going to need to do. Geno Smith is distributing like crazy right now. He looks awesome. This is a very different Geno Smith in an offense that was effectively created for him or built for him than last year when he was plugged into an offense that was created and kind of built around Russell Wilson. So this is a different Geno Smith, and this is a little bit more close to, in terms of what the Seattle Seahawks are building around him, close to his skill set. He gets the ball out quickly, makes quick reads, makes good decisions, keeps the ball close to the line of scrimmage, but then is able to take the top off and then push downfield when those opportunities present themselves. So that becomes point number 3, and going back and staying with the Saints defense is eliminating the explosive plays. So that's going to take good safety play. It looks like you're going to get Marcus May back this week. That certainly helps a ton with point number 3. Okay, point number 4. Being able to take the top off with Chris Olave while also being able to run in the screen game. So I guess what I'll call it is dynamics. You need to have a dynamic passing game in this game. You're going to be able to get a lot of explosive plays against the Seattle Seahawks defense, or you should be able to. They've given them up tons over the course of the first 4 games of the season. So can you capitalize on that with Chris Olave, with Jarvis Landry, with Taysom Hill, with Alvin Kamara even running a wheel route out of the backfield? It's those things, but in order for that to work, you have to have a dynamic passing game that stretches the defense laterally like we talked about, which means sideline to sideline. And also one that makes them pay attention to how things are actually developing behind the line of scrimmage. Deontay Hardy, a jet sweep screen. Chris Olave, a bubble screen or a tunnel screen. a nice tight end screen every now and then to Adam Troutman, which we saw work last week, a screen to Alvin Kamara, as he gets out to the flats, things like that. Those moments actually allow you to also be able to build up so that you can take those deep shots a little bit later. And then if the run game is going, then you can play all of this off of play action as well. So having a dynamic passing game becomes a very, very important thing against the Seattle Seahawks defense, which is very young and very aggressive. So you want to be able to take advantage of that. So a couple of screens over here, not in a row, obviously, but a screen over here, a screen over there later, and then a similar look a third time that's actually a double move on the outside. You know what I mean? Like those types of little adjustments and building tendencies so that you can break them throughout, creating those so that you can break those tendencies and then be able to kind of build off of that dynamic offense. And then point number 5 here, very, very simple. We've been saying it all week. The team has been saying it all week. And really, if I'm being honest, what this all boils down to is just play good football, right? Eliminate the the turnovers, the giveaways, and get rid of the penalties. That's simple. And I know that there are some penalties that are being called that are questionable, right? More than questionable. I mean, we know what we're talking about here. I'm not going to go through and reprise all of this, but a couple of the penalties against Minnesota that clearly shouldn't have been called. Yes, there's those, but there's also the false start penalties, the procedural penalties, the illegal shift penalties, the illegal man downfield penalties, the holding penalties, things like that. Those still have to get cleaned up because those are the ones that are momentum killing on the offensive side when you're finally starting to string together a drive and then all of a sudden you got to take 5 steps back. You got to take 10 steps back. All that. Those things still have to get cleaned up. Doesn't matter if the refs are making bad calls here and there. You're also still shooting yourself in the foot by giving up over 100 penalty yards in the game last week against Minnesota. Can't reprise that. You can't repeat that here against Seattle. You can't beat yourself, right? You have to play good football. That's point number 5. And in a way that's all encompassing of what the New Orleans Saints simply need to do moving forward throughout the rest of the season. All right, coming up next, we're going to dive into beignets and parlays. I'm going to tell you how far Chris Olave has climbed up the Offensive Rookie of the Year charts over at BetOnline, as well as why the money line might be the way to go because the Saints not so great against the spread at home under a specific condition. We'll break all that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, your number one source for everything that you need around your sports wagering needs, whether it is that you want to bet on the New Orleans Saints, or maybe you want to look elsewhere across the NFL. Maybe you put some money on which game was going to be the most boring in the world, and you put it on the Thursday night Denver Broncos and Indianapolis Colts game. Congratulations, you won, because that was atrocious. But when it comes down to BetOnline, you can find anything that you want. NFL, NBA, which is right around the corner. Go Pelicans. MLB with the playoffs and World Series playoffs getting underway. NHL, you've got college football, college basketball is on the way. There's so much for you to get in on. And that's just kind of like the big ones. There's also esports, combat sports, auto racing, a whole bunch of stuff that you can check out over at BetOnline anytime you want. BetOnline.net, they've got everything that you need in terms of all the odds, lines, and props. They've also got articles, podcasts, and information, scores, everything that you're looking for there as well. So go and check them out today. BetOnline, the official online betting partners here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Find them, BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with beignets and parlays. Before we dive into it, I want to let you know today's question of the day, which you can answer in the YouTube comments or on Twitter by writing me at Ross Jackson Nolo. What is your score prediction and result for this this weekend's game between the New Orleans Saints and the Seattle Seahawks? You think the Saints are going to win? What's the score prediction you have there? I think the Seattle Seahawks are going to win. What's the score prediction you have there? Hit me up. Let me know what you think. All right. Beignets and parlays brought to you by BetOnline, where they have all of the odds, lines, and props you can ever imagine. BetOnline, where the game starts. This week, we are looking at the New Orleans Saints and the Seattle Seahawks. This is quite the spread. New Orleans Saints 5.5 point favorites, minus 5.5 in this one at home. New Orleans minus 240 on the money line, so I'm going to consider there. And then you have the over-under right now currently set at 46. The New Orleans Saints combined with the Minnesota Vikings last week to pass 50 points. Can they do that again here with the Seattle Seahawks that just scored 48 in a game? I mean, up against the NFL's worst defense, maybe something to keep in mind there. But for me, the thing that I'm looking at here is the money line. Because if you think the New Orleans is going to win this game, this is probably the route to go for me. It's not the biggest winnings because obviously they're favored, but it's a little bit better than going against the spread. Now, going against the spread is a way to go, but the Saints are 13-13 since 2017 when they're favored by 5 or more points at home. But straight up, they're 21-5. So that's the condition that I'm looking at here. The Saints are 21-5 when favored by 5 or more points at home. That includes them being 1-2 last season in 2022, all with 3 different quarterbacks in those games. They're 1-2 against the spread and straight up in those. So maybe you have a little bit more faith in, let's say, Andy Dalton under center than you had faith in, Trevor Siemian or Ian Book. Well, they weren't favored in that game, but or Taysom Hill under center, right? So depending upon how you feel about that, you might feel a little bit more comfortable about the Saints this year than you felt about them last year. You certainly should, considering the names on the paper, but with the way that they've been playing so far this season, I understand the hesitation. So that's why I don't necessarily go with the spread on this one. I mean, all the sharp action kind of came in at 4 points, not necessarily at 5 or 5.5 or even at 6 at one point. For more on kind of context on this and whether or not the New Orleans Saints line is going to move one way or another, depending upon Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston, I have a clip for you here that I'm going to share from our friend. He's an odds maker over at BetOnline, Dave Mason, and what he has to say about how the line moved, what changed, and if it would change again between Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston.
Minus 4.5, Saints 4.5 point favorites. Went up to 5.5 and then 6, believe it or not. Back down to 5.5. We did take some sharp action on the Saints at -4. 73% of the early bettors are on Seattle. 53% of the money's on New Orleans. There's not much of a difference between Winston and Dalton. So if Winston does give it a go, there's not going to be too much of a line change. I mean, they're almost kind of opposite quarterbacks. With Andy Dalton, you're going to get an average performance. With Winston, he could look like an all-pro or he could look like a CFL backup. So either way, I don't think there's going to be much of a line move. We're not too concerned with who's under center for New Orleans on Sunday. All
right, so CFL backup was a little egregious, but what more can you expect from somebody who pronounces it New Orleans? But, that is what it is. But when it comes down to this game, it doesn't look like anything's really going to move in terms of whether it's Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston. Again, we expect it to be Andy Dalton at this time, but certainly we'll see. So I think the money line might be the way to go here. A couple of interesting little nuggets in terms of game props that are going on in this one. The odds on favorites for touchdowns scored by each team, 3 touchdowns scored by the Saints, 2 touchdowns scored by the Seattle Seahawks, and then over 4.5 touchdowns total is the favorite here. So they're expecting some, action in this game, which would be good for the New Orleans Saints coming back. To even be able to get 3 touchdowns in this one is, would be a good sign, especially if you're starting to get them in the first half, right? So getting all of that and kind of getting that rhythm would be really, really good for the New Orleans Saints. And then we'll wrap up here with a look at Chris Olave, who has climbed the Offensive Rookie of the Year charts again. He's now back on top over at BetOnline. He's got 335 receiving yards, probably should have more. Scored his first touchdown last week. And the expectation is that that will be far from his last. He did go back to the tent at one point, looked like he was visiting with the concussion protocol specialist, got back out on the field, made the big catch at the end of the game that put the Saints in position to try the 61-yard field goal that just couldn't, that Will Lutz wasn't able to clear. But then went off the field kind of like limping, had a little bit of an ankle thing and came back. He's looked fine all throughout practice so far this week. So I don't think he's going to slow down this week. I think he continues to be a big part of the game plan. Plus 400 right now as the favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year. Right behind him is still Drake London, Garrett Wilson. The other wide receivers are there. But watch soon for Kenny Pickett, because Kenny Pickett coming in and now taking over as Mitch Trubisky, because he's a quarterback, one good game, Kenny Pickett's going to skyrocket to the top when it comes to those odds. So if you want better odds on Chris Olave, it might be worth waiting to see him kind of like drop down a little bit once Kenny Pickett has like a good game. That's all it's going to take. Kenny Pickett could have 3 bad games and then have a good game, and then all of a sudden he's going to skyrocket to the top because he's a quarterback, and that's what everyone values in terms of Offensive Rookie of the Year, end of year awards, all that other stuff. So it might be worth waiting on Chris Olave, but still pretty cool to see that Chris Olave has been exactly who we thought he would be in this New Orleans Saints system, and even people outside of New Orleans see it that way as well. All right, y'all, enjoy the game this weekend. Remember, we have our live postcast, which will take place. I'm just going to do it from the Superdome right after, a little bit after press conferences and all that. So just keep an eye out on the Locked On Saints YouTube page so you know when we're ready to go live to kind of break that down. It'll be our 10 to 15 minute postcast that we'll do live. Then I'll come home and get my thoughts together, rewatch the game, and then we'll do a more in-depth deep dive for Monday morning. So I appreciate you, as always, for making us a part of your day. Make sure you keep it locked here on the page, because also if anything big happens over the course of the weekend, I'm not one to not do a Saturday episode. Happy to do it if we need to. So, with everything going on with Jameis Winston, quarterbacks, all that, definitely keep it locked over on the Twitter page at Ross Jackson Nola so you know what's going on here with the show. Appreciate you, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day for your second listen. Make sure you go and check out that Peacock and Williamson NFL show. All the NFL news and analysis you need in less than 30 minutes from former NFL scout Matt Williamson and NFL analyst Brian Peacock. And of course, make sure you check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans as well, with the Pelicans season creeping closer and closer and closer and closer, and I cannot wait. Appreciate you, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.